Hey folks, my name is Tony Mo. I'm a newer GM. I've got about a year's worth of weekly GM sessions under my belt. Over the course of the last 3+ years across a variety of systems, I like to create discussion, conversation, occasionally guides and even reviews on my experiences as a GM. But today is a celebratory day because we're going to talk about my very first session as a player. Now, before this, going back 4 years during the days of 3.5, I once played in about an hour-long session with a friend who was just trying to introduce me to tabletop games because I showed interest in GMing. And that's it. I don't really remember much of that session, apart from some bats in a cave. I never really considered it to be a legit, proper session. I didn't even get to make my own character. It was just like, name this pre-gen character. I didn't understand any of the systems, but now I've been running 5e, a little bit of 3.5 in the past, Cyberpunk Red, and so I have a lot more experience as a GM, and so I got to go into this actually making a character, doing it in Pathfinder. 1E is where my buddy is familiar. This is actually the character of the business in my Cyberpunk Red campaign, for those of you who follow along with that. He was like, yeah, I'd love to, to DM again. And he put this together. We're playing what is going to be a mix of homebrew and modules in the Exandria setting, specifically in Tal'Dorei right now, just about a year after the fall of the Chroma Conclave, for those of you who are familiar with Critical Role. So I went about and started developing a character. This was actually over 3 months ago. We started talking about this not long after I started running Cyberpunk Red for everybody. And so I was already pitching around some ideas. I think I was really caught on the idea of being a ranger. Had a little bit of an idea of what I want to do as far as RP and personality for this character, kind of doing a more radical take on Robin Hood. What if Robin Hood, but also, didn't mind being much, much more potentially brutal to the people who would seek to harm the defenseless, the average folk. Basically fuck the nobility type character a little bit more heavily. So I guess let's just do a brief character introduction, then we'll talk about my first session, because it's very much going to be a player diary for our first session. I wrote a lot. I'm a big note taker when I GM, and it turns out that translates to me being a player character as well. So my character is Oxtrav Skyguard, or Oxtrav of Iman, as he would later become known. He is a half-orc, a 31 years old, class ranger. He was abandoned at birth in the mountains, the Cliffkeep Mountains, where he was, essentially saved, rescued by the Skyguard. The Skyguard are a group of sort of misfits. They take in just about anyone who is seeking refuge, if they're willing to learn how to hunt dragons. The Skyguard specifically hunt, dragons that look to cause harm to the peoples of Tal'Dorei, and that's kind of his background. That's how he gets the name Skyguard at birth, and Oxtrav at birth. The leader of the Skyguard, his sort of surrogate mother, takes him in, trains him as a dragon hunter. He spends literally his entire life up until his 29th birthday fighting for the Skyguard. At which point he decides to leave to see the world, to go explore the rest of Tal'Dorei. And in the time before we start our campaign, he goes to Lyringorn and develops a relationship with an elf there. He goes to Craghammer, and goes as far as to actually become friends with Balgus of Balgus Brewery, who is also from Critical Role. He gets a few sort of bits of memorabilia from those locations. There's a very important piece of my character's story that is tied to Lyringorn, but we'll talk about that on another day. And then he arrives at Iman, the capital city of Tal'Dorei, going there to seek exploration and knowledge and experiences, but he arrives the day before the Chroma Conclave, specifically Thordak's arrival at Iman, and he ends up struggling to survive there. He lends his skill as a ranger and a dragon hunter to help the defense forces at Iman, eventually forming his own rebellion with some members of the Clasp down in the grotto, to strike out these sort of guerrilla tactic style attacks on Thordak's forces until the Vox Machina arrive and manage to save a lot of the people of Iman by teleporting them to Whitestone. He spends out the remaining days of the war in Whitestone, and now over a year later, he's been summoned back to Iman for the first time since by the Master of Defense and the Master of Information to go on this quest. Alongside of this, Oxtrov, during his time at Emon, becomes friends with Rixel the Druid. Rixel the Druid is played by my good friend Alex. We wanted to have like a character relationship in this particular campaign. I was like, you could be like a brother or, like a battle kin. And so he's like, well, he comes up with this idea eventually after much brainstorming between a lot of us to play this druid. Very of the woods druid covered in natural armor. And Rixel, she is, very skilled. And while she is at Emon with my character, she gets the nickname the Light of Emon for the amount of people she was able to save using her druidic powers. And so I draw on that heavily in my RP because I know that Rixel's character is more low-key, whereas my character is very outward, likes to interact with people, likes to get to know people, and likes to hype up his friends and his family and the people he, would call his companions, and, people he would, essentially give his life for. Rixel is very much one of those people. So, yeah, very excited about this character. I've been having a ton of fun playing them. Our first session ended up being 8 hours long. We really just kind of kept playing and we're all having a blast. And it took us a lot longer, I think, to get through content than my buddy Mike originally thought. This being like his first time, GM, he planned out a lot of stuff. Like we all do, plan out a little bit too much and then the players take forever to get through it, but in a good way. So I had an absolute blast. Now, we are actually in a module, and once this module is done, we're going to push out into, like I said, a mix of homebrew and additional module stuff is the way Mike's going to run it. I don't know that module. I don't plan on ever naming it. Some of you might figure it out if you're really familiar. I do believe it is a Pathfinder module, obviously. But nonetheless, we end up going to this city called Karpod, located just outside of Emon. Not just outside, but a week's trip outside of Emon, going up to the northwest. This is basically the job the Master of Defense and Master of Information have given us. There is this noble in town, whose name I do have written down. Let's double check it. Lord Davin Tiferos, who wants, them to find out what's going on with his daughter. His daughter is married to the Baron of Karpod, and he has not received any sort of communique from her in over a week, which is not the norm for her. He sends her regular messages. No one has came from Karpod. They even sent the Council of Emon, even sent a scout who never returned. And so, it's that kind of like, go help my daughter. There's like some religion stuff involved here, specifically with Karpod being a town that has a lot of worshippers of Zon-Kuthon. I remembered that before I looked it up. They are typically on the, sort of lawful side of Zon-Kuthon, where they self-harm and mutilation and stuff is restricted to them as a person and those who are fellow believers who do it willingly. And yeah, so we take the week's trip and we go and investigate. I should also mention that my character, Oxtrive as a ranger, does have a companion. That is a female red-tailed hawk by the name of Alvo, who doesn't really get much in the way of anything happening in this first session because we're indoors. And we also didn't really fully have the character implemented into the companion implemented into Foundry, as this was also kind of a session 0 for us. I had never played. There's some people getting comfortable with Pathfinder again after playing Cyberpunk in my campaign for how long. And so while we were legitimately running content, we were also under the impression that we'll be able to make changes before we really settle into the primary session 1. And so, yeah, my companion is something we'll talk about more in the future. But there are cases where I sort of use them narratively. Hey, Alvo, I'm going to send Alvo up to scout while we're at the Baron's Manor, etc., etc. So let's just really dive into the player experience that was the rest of this this session. All the way, I'm, as a player trying to figure out how I want to RP my character. Like I said, I already had developed some basic personality traits for, I'd say more than basic even, a really good outline of how I think my character would act. Very loyal to his companions and friends, wears his heart on his sleeve, is very outwardly spoken about things, extremely empathetic to those suffering under the reign of the nobility, especially, but also quick to turn my strength and skills against the people he believes deserve it. And it does carry a particular disdain for Stablemint that plays profits before people, and finds the political structure of much of Tal'Dorei to be one that does not value all of its people equally, as is demonstrated by Oxtrav's experience during the reign of Thordak in Emon, in the slums of Emon, trying to help the people there during Thordak's reign. So, yeah, that's kind of the gist of that. Let's roll into it. We get to Carpod, and we find out that there are like pyres all over the place, burning. After a little bit of investigation of some of the people out in the streets near the town square, we see that they have this nasty, poxus infection on their necks. I went pretty hard. I wasn't gonna hold back. Like, I know that I'm a very heavy RP person. That I was very excited about this portion of playing my own character in a campaign for the first time. But I also know that not everybody is like that. Having ran for these guys, I've ran for all of them except for one who joined us, who's actually going to be in a future campaign of mine, who does not play in our Cyberpunk campaign. So I wasn't expecting a ton of super heavy RP from them, and my buddy Trevor was playing a warrior, Jackson Killblade, who's very like low key, just get the job done type character. So I knew what to expect for his RP in this particular instance. So I was just like, yeah, my character is diplomatic and charismatic and communicates with people and has spent the last 3 years of his life traveling Tal'Dorei, getting to know people and building relationships. And he prizes those relationships, and he also, is open to helping people. So. My character immediately tries to interact with these people, and they're just like, oh, God, half-orc, big, dude, tusks, and they blow us off. So not long after, we decide, let's just go to the Baron's Manor, and try and find Anya, the daughter of the noble that sent us, Darren Tiferos. Man, I'm telling you, Pathfinder names, they're fine once you say them a few times, but the first time, you're like, what the hell? Just an idea of my journal. I definitely, I was like, I'm going to write some stuff. Got a little sketch for Alvo. These are the locations we went to, and then the combat that I actually didn't get a chance to finish, so we're still technically in session 0. So Lord Davin's daughter, Anya. We go and we end up meeting her after we're brought into the Baron's Manor by the head servant, Lauren Chow. And Lady Anya is... almost immediately, kind of feels like she's not just being straight with us. She's like surprised that we were sent by her father, which is weird because we're like, that's not the gist we got from your father. He was very concerned, and so eventually she breaks down and tells us what's been happening. The Baron, her husband, has locked himself away essentially in his study, extremely paranoid, just been, very isolated ever since the first case of... what they end up revealing is called Tallothroat to us, for those of you who might actually know how that works mechanically. We had no idea until a little bit later on. So we're like, okay, she breaks down and is just like, I need your help. We'll pay anything, yada, yada. And, we end up asking questions, talking to her for a bit. My character, Oxtrav, is very much like, when did this start? When did the behavior with the Baron start? Is there anything else you can inform of us? And that's when we learn, we knew this going to this, I should say. We did stop at the library in Emon to do a little bit of research on Carpod and Zon Kuthan and some other things. But we know that Carpod has an extremely rare and large population of fetchlings. Fetchlings are sort of like a humanoid shadow people. They're tied to the shadow plane. We learned from the time in the library, and one of our characters is a magus, so that helped us out. And yeah, they're very thin, dark, sort of gray-green skin. And yeah, there's just this huge population there. And that's when we learned that the Baron fired all of the fetchlings except for one, and that happens to be the Houndmaster, who takes care of the dogs. And so after we're done kind of telling the lady Anya, like, we'll help you and stuff like that, I'm like, I want to go talk to the Houndmaster and ask a little bit more about this. Basically, I wanted to know if the Baron was always, always had an issue with fetchlings. Was he always, essentially racist against these people? Did he have some issue with them that he was, kind of always just on the brink of blaming them for all of his problems? But as it turns out, that was, not the case. They are very much servants still, but there was no problem with them beforehand up until this point. And so something to do with the shadows that he keeps talking about seeing that Anya has told us about, he has tied this to the fetchlings. We find out not much longer after that, like the entire town is like, blaming the fetchlings for everything, mostly because I don't think they really understand. I don't think the majority of the people understand the way they tied to the shadow planes, as we find out. But they realize the fetchlings cannot contract whatever this Tallothroat. They are immune to it, and so they blame them for the disappearances of their people and the Tallothroat itself. So after we talk to the Houndmaster, we find that information out, but we also find out that a good friend of his, actually somebody who he's having a sort of a relationship with, under the table, a human, is missing. And so at this point, my character's like, okay, there's a lot of missing people. I start making this list and make it, sort of a goal during our investigation and our time here to figure out what is happening and how we can stop this Tallow Throat, to also try and find these missing people. Not only might they be clues that will lead us to the source of the Tallow Throat and any other nefarious happenings here in Carpod, but yeah, I wanna, try and help these people. Oxtrov would absolutely want that, and so we take it on him. I tell him, your secret is fine with us. I'm not gonna let anybody know that you've had this interaction with this person. No one needs to know. And then the last thing I ask him is like, when was the last time you saw her? I believe her name was actually, let's see, I wrote it down. Maybe I didn't write it down. I'm pretty sure I did. Anyway, we find out about his missing friend, Irene. That's right, Irene. She was last seen at her home with the local chandelier. Individual makes candles. And so we're like, now, okay, we've got a couple places we're going to go. We want to go talk to the fetchlings, potentially find the ones who were fired in Shade Row. We can also go to the chandeliers and see if we can talk with her, since she was the last person to see Irene. Before we do any of that, we end up going and talking to the Baron, which is honestly, I was just kind of like, this dude's paranoid. I had no plans of that, but it gets suggested by Anya that we should go see him by his wife, and so we do. And he's, as we find out, very paranoid, in his study, filled with candles, just going on and on about shadows and all this other nonsense. Before he even knows we're there, as we get led in, Thordak, our Magus, attempts to do like a detect, magic thing to see if we can find a curse on him. He does not have the ability to roll sleight of hand on this, and so he makes a bit of noise. But we find out, well, actually, the thing that is noticeable to us almost immediately is that he has no shadow. The Baron has no shadow. He casts magic, and all we really get from his role is that, he informs us there's a sense of something nefarious in this room, and we see kind of this weird thing in the corner, almost like it's like this entity in the light in the corner of the room, and that's kind of it. We don't choose to investigate any of that stuff further, just thinking, I think a lot of us were caught up in the shadow at the time. I know I was like, what the hell, man? Did he cast his own shadow off him? I even asked Anya at one point, I'm just like, I'm gonna be straight with you. Like, did your husband, cast the spell to remove his own shadow? Like, considering how paranoid he was. And I roll like diplomacy. Don't do that, right? She doesn't give me a straight answer, but she does just kind of fill us in some other little bits and bobs. I should point out that while we're with the Houndmaster, we learn the name of the biggest hound, sort of the lead hound there, which is important later on, and I will leave it at that. So we decide, let's go ahead and make our way to Shade Row. As we head into the town square, we're greeted with this small crowd around the tree at the center of the town square. We can see nooses hanging from the tree, and this individual who has also been infected with the Tallow Throat, a human, has a small a fetchling family essentially held, and is, on a soapbox preaching to the people, blaming the fetchlings for the disappearance of their loved ones. Excuse me. And the Tallow Throat itself. Oxtrov is immediately just charges through the crowd. So I was like, I charged the crowd immediately to break this up, to attempt to, dispatch some diplomacy or some conversation. Like, this is not about to go down on my watch. These people are not about to be hung. And I immediately faced not just the crowd, but also this character who we later learn out is actually the head of the watch for the town, named Lucian. And I get to do a bunch of fun diplomatic roles. The cool thing about this was, again, this is the early days of my character build as my first character, and I'm like, I didn't put points in diplomacy. I have points in a bunch of other stuff, expecting to play this character differently, not really remembering how important diplomacy is going to be if I want to talk with people. And so I don't have, anything good in this. Everybody is trained in it, regardless if you take ranks in it or not. But I get some really good roles. At one point, I even preem, and I managed to, talk down the crowd. My friend, Jackson Killblade, not friend, but a companion, who's on this journey with us now. He tries to get in on it. I back him up again, explaining to the people, we're working for the Baron. We're gonna find this cure. We're gonna figure out what's going on here, but we need you all to help us, and we need you to do your best to stop spreading this plague. You need to stop interacting with one another. You need to isolate. You need to social distance. The full sort of gambit. And this was probably my favorite thing. All right, my buddy Alex, when he gets into his character, it's great to see him get his character. But he definitely, in terms of maintaining focus when somebody else is on a long, like RP back and forth, a couple characters, I know he can lose focus. And so I like to try and pull him into stuff, especially because that's the point of, that's our relationship as characters. We fought at Emon. We survived Thordax Reign. We have a very special relationship, Rixel and Oxtrov. And so I ask him, like, where would Rixel be right now? Is she at the front of the crowd? He's like, yeah, if you ran up, she would have followed, like, right, after you. I was like, okay. I was like, so I pull Rixel up, and I'm like, you may know this is the light of Emon. Rixel is my good friend here, is an incredibly talented druid, and she is. She has saved many lives, and she is here with us. We're under the Baron's order to find these answers. We go on, and Rixel, like, she goes and tells people, like, yes, you need to please try to isolate yourselves. There's already been proof, and we did it. This was actually something we discovered in talking with Anya, was that they finally started isolating at the Baron's Manor, and they saw, a reduction in the cases, and they were able to keep a lot of the staff healthy. And so, we use that as leverage, because these people are very much like what the Baron says. Unfortunately, the last thing the Baron has said to them is a bunch of paranoid shit about the fetchlings. So we kind of break that away from that, and the crowd kind of disperses, and then we turn to Lucian. And I, just go for sympathy right away. That's exactly what Oxtrov would do. He recognizes this individual, even though he was about to do something terrible. I don't believe I don't believe his character would have gone all the way through with it, considering how easy it was for us to dissuade the townspeople. But maybe he would have. Nonetheless, Oxtrov is like, you say you lost somebody. You said they took your daughter. What is your daughter's name? Tells us his daughter name. Oliel is like, where was she, and disappeared. He's like, she was just playing in the yard when I was on watch and my wife was cooking, and then she just vanished. And I'm like, I write her name down, and I'm like, what does she look like? I'm like, we're gonna try and find people. Like, that's a part of our investigation here, and we're able to really settle them down. And then prime opportunity for us, we're like, we want to try and get some more information about the Talother, about this plague. Will you help us with that? My good friend Rixel here, she'd like to ask of you to drink this potion, to a potion basically to for him to know in his head then what the disease was, and how it possibly worked. So he agrees to this, drinks the potion, and because he's not a magic user, isn't fully able to describe it, but he is able to reveal the idea. Basically, you get this. It lasts several days, and if you then you die, your throat burst open and shadows come out. Right? That's how this character explained it to us. But at that point, the GM did reveal to us mechanically how Talother works. It is like a charisma save based thing where each day, you based on your charisma, you have to roll against it. And when you fail, you die, and shadows burst out of your neck. We don't really know what those shadows are yet, but it ties back to everything we've learned from, obviously, the Baron and his paranoia. So that was actually pretty valuable. We also saved this fetchling family, and that gives us an opportunity to go to Shade Row. Not long after we finish with Lucian, they're actually there. There's this huge crowd of fetchlings out, and they're talking about how we, came and saved them. And they point to all of us as we approach, they're the ones who saved us. And so now we have this relationship with them. We're able to chat with them. And we learned some very interesting rumors about the Baron, specifically that he sold out to this, terrible creature. We, obviously take it as rumors. Obviously the fetchlings not in a very good stance with the rest of the town, and especially the Baron, considering the accusations he's made against them and the way their lives have been threatened by the townspeople because of this. So, I'm also like, okay, well, rumors are rumors, but let's keep that in consideration. Everything as they said, especially considering just the Baron's general paranoia, just seems like a man, to me anyway. I was like, a Oxtrov who would do just about anything at this point to save his people. And the way he spoke about just his family and them being the ones who are infected, it was already very clear that he was ready to point the finger and do some drastic things here. If he hadn't already, as we found out not long after. So after that communication with them, we decided to go to the Chandelier. It's okay, let's go see the Chandelier. We arrive at this candle shop. We knock on the door. Nobody answers. And so Jackson Killblade knocks on the door. He opens it up, and we decide to go and see what's up. As we open the door, this sort of wax figure is in there. We see all the candles, and I'm just like, does Chandelier make a wax watchman? That's in my head. I'm just like, that's actually pretty funny. And then he's like, the figure moves towards you. We're like, oh shit. And so he's like, it moves closer, and I'm like, okay, I fire an entangle arrow. I have arrows that have like an alchemical adhesive that spreads out, and I attempt to entangle this thing. I managed to slow it to like half speed because I don't want to kill it. I don't really know what it is, but also I'm gonna go ahead and entangle it. At that point, we go into combat. We're like just at the front of this shop. It's then Jackson Killblade's turn in the initiative order as our fighter, and he crits with overhand chop and absolutely murders this thing. Just dead. Wax figure just cut down the middle, and we're like, okay, combat's over. And we go and we explore the rest of the Chandelier shop. After a little bit of digging, we find a trap door. And we decide to like disarm this by pulling the trap itself with the rope that I had. And just triggering it and then just getting down the stairs. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to stealth down the stairs, not realizing I just triggered this loud, like, electrical trap. I realized, but I didn't, like, really process. Like, I'm going to stealth down the stairs. So I stealth down the stairs, my character's good at stealth. And there's these two, shadowy apparitions waiting for me, and we roll into combat with these things. We do, of course, figure out that, like, none of us have, like, holy or religion as good checks, so we're not able to use those. Even though I think, we're all kind of like, that's what we would probably have to make. Mike eventually lets us know, like, yeah, he's like, none of you guys have this. Unfortunately, those are the checks you would need. So, figure it out. We quickly learn, that you need to hit them with magic attacks, right? Which sucks for me as an archer. I don't have anything, but we did actually get some magic scrolls while we were in Emon, and so it's just a matter of our Magus casting them on us. It takes a few turns. My first ever combat engagement as a player character, okay, in my first ever proper campaign, I just shoot an arrow through a shadow and it hits the wall on the other side because there's nothing else I could do. And I was like, I'm just going to probe. I'll shoot a blunt arrow, actually, just in case. And so, yeah, that was the theme of being a ranger that night for my first combat, which was pretty funny. I did have some other good moments, but nonetheless, that goes around. We eventually managed to destroy these two things, and we find the Chandelier dead in this room, and there's another doorway that leads into another area. And so we're like, okay, well, we go in. We're going to... we also find out actually that the Chandelier did die, fell to the Tallow Throat, and that's what spawned these two shadows, we assumed anyway. We go into the next room, and we're greeted by this Fae, this Lurker in Light, as it turns out it is, who has like two just civilians with like clubs and like no gear on defending them. They've definitely been put under some sort of a trance or spell. And then there's all these vats of wax, and there are people like half sticking out of these vats, like being covered in this wax. At this point, I would make it very clear that I didn't say this out loud, but Oxtrov was like, we just killed someone upstairs. We killed an innocent person who was turned into a wax construct. This has got to be what happened. I feel like Oxtrov he's traveled a bit. He's seen constructs in one form or another, and he's like, did we just kill somebody? It doesn't say it out loud because I wasn't sure that maybe it was a little metagamey, having a very basic idea of constructs. I think the good thing about actually coming to this campaign is I'm super unfamiliar with Pathfinder stuff. No fucking clue what they do with all of their things. I know it's similar to a lot of D&D related things, but even then, my time DMing in 5e and stuff is all homebrew. So I just make stuff up. I've had very little time actually reading lore, and even the bestiary is a very fresh thing to me still. So I do have that going for me, which is pretty nice. I rarely felt like I was like, oh, I know this because I'm a player, not because of Oxtrov. It was more so like, would Oxtrov know this based on what I've done with my DM in the background? But nonetheless, I'm slightly concerned about that, and was like, okay. We end up having this conversation with this thing that really pisses Oxtrov off. This Lurker in the Light is just like, it sounds like he's trying to play like a fiddle. The Baron gave me permission to do all of this, so I don't understand. What happened to Chandelier? We're like, she's dead in the other room. She died of Tallow Throat. What do you mean? I was like, do you not know there's a plague going on up there? Oh, I'm just here to help the Baron deal with the shadows and protect the town and the people. And I'm like, dude. Just so manipulative. Mike did a really good job role-playing this character because, like, the point was for them to be this manipulative individual. That's kind of what they are, very mischievous, as we find out. And he immediately set the tone for that, because Oxtrav's just like, I fucking don't trust you. How could you not know about this? And how do you think this is helping anyone? And so this conversation doesn't last long. I'm like ready to go at any moment, like I fire arrow. But Jackson thinks pretty quick on his feet and is like, I'm going to look at one of the humans in the cauldron, in the vats of wax. And he yells over at them. He's like, if you need help, blink twice. They blink twice. I'm like, I fire an arrow. I just immediately, I fire an arrow at this phase. And so we go ahead and roll into combat. We end up having a bit of back and forth. As it turns out, this lurker in the light, is able to cast daylight on things, and it does it on these massive wax vats and uses it to hide. So it manages to, essentially disappear, to go invisible on us. And so we have some fun combat back and forth. It was a good opportunity for me to get acquainted with actually playing the Ranger and using my different abilities like Rapid Shot. I should point out I'm level 4 at this point. So I've got Rapid Shot and Point Blank. And I've got a variety of arrows. One of my things as an RP thing which also influences gameplay for Oxdrav, is that he is, extremely skilled marksman, obviously, having spent his life hunting dragons, but also has an obsession for making his own arrows, doing the fletchings, everything from scrap, arrowheads. And so I have a menagerie of different arrow types that I was like, this could be useful. So I've got the Entangled, we've got Blunt for non-lethal. I've got some bleeding arrows that are actually made from a carnivorous plant, I was like, yeah, this is going to be fun as shit. And I ended up getting to use all of these. It was pretty cool. Like I said, we used the alchemical arrow. I actually try and use it on the Fae, but then it's like, oh yeah, they were described as flying. It's this adhesive. I think if I had rolled really well for the hit, Mike might have let me maybe stop this thing from flying, but it was just a terrible hit. So not much happened there. But then we had to deal with these, what seemingly were just like civilians that, again, had been put under some sort of a spell to fight for this lurker in the light. And so the rest of the group, I'm like 5th in initiative order at this point, I think. It's going to go before me. Rixel, my buddy Alex, she decides to non-lethal on this, and she's able to knock them out in like one hit with very little damage. I'm like, okay, I can definitely do this then. And so I pull out the surprise that no one even knew I had. I was like, I fire a blunt arrow, which can be used as non-lethal at range. And I'm able to knock out the other one. So we dispatch the civilians and, save them, put them down. Don't have to do anything awful to them. We get to focus on the lurker in light. Now, we're actually still in this combat going into next week's session because things went for so long. But we end up having some back and forth. Like I said, the lurker manages to light up a thing in daylight. Jackson Killblade manages to just smash this thing to bits. We pull it out of darkness. We get to fight a little bit more. I end up firing 2 bleeding arrows. I get a rapid shot on this thing and make it bleed, which was cool. Just kind of getting used to my general movement and mechanics as a character. And then, unfortunately, the lurker in light manages to do this again. I actually miss an attempt to grapple. I was going to use these arrows I have that have silk rope attached to them to try and pierce this thing with a barbed arrow and grapple it to hold it down, and I just whiffed the hit entirely. I had some bad rolls. I should be good at shooting. I had some bad rolls that night. Okay, it was my first thing. It was like, give them to me. I'm a GM. I can take it. And so Jackson, gets the daylight right next to him. The lurker light lights this thing up and hides again. He actually manages to attack the last known position and get a whiff. But he's like, we got to do something about this light. He's like, he starts asking on his turn, could I cover it up? Yada, yada. And so I start thinking about that as well. Like, yeah, covering it up would totally make sense. So he kind of yells that out. He's like, we need to try and cover this on his turn. So 2 bouts in the initiative order later, it's my turn. I'm like, okay, I'm going to throw my bedroll to Jackson. And so that's what I do. I throw my bedroll to Jackson. I'm like, hey, maybe this can help. He uses the bedroll plus his blanket that he had to cover half of this massive vat. And we managed to push the light and, cut off the light that was actually facing the part of the room where we were. So like half, not even like a quarter of the room is still lit up where this thing could hide along the edges, basically. But the rest of the room is now exposed, and we get back into combat. And that's actually where we end up leaving off. I think I actually fire the bleeding arrows after this now that it's exposed. I managed to get 2 bleeds on it, so it's bleeding for 2 HP at the end of each turn if it doesn't make its saves. And then we kind of, we're like, okay, let's call it there. It's been 8 hours. That's a long session, but I had a fucking blast. It was a great time. There were definitely, like I said, a lot of things I learned about Oxdrav and like finally actually RPing them, and thinking about the things that matter more to me than not. I took a pretty decent intelligence score to get the extra skill points. And I think I'm going to actually, like I said, we get one opportunity to sort of refine our characters before we go into the rest of the campaign, because Mike knows that we've got to, I've never played. I'm just the GM. So he's giving me that. And so I think I'm going to flip my charisma and my intelligence, take a loss to that. I have like points in ranks in disguise, ranks in stealth. I think I'm actually going to dump off all of the disguise ranks, probably dump off most of the stealth ranks and put them, do charisma, put those into diplomacy. And I think that really fits my character a lot better. My character's really not necessarily the sneaky sort. They are very acrobatic, and that's fine. I'm going to leave those points there. But they've spent their time, speaking and communicating and living as a member of the Sky Guard with all sorts of individuals from all walks of life, fighting dragons in very tactical, team-oriented experiences. And so I want to really push for that. And also, Alvo is finished as a companion and is in the game now with all of her wonderful perks and bombard. So there's definitely going to be some things I'm going to consider going forward as I, level up my character to work more in hand with her, with my bird, who has like fucking 35 HP. My bird is ridiculous because of the Falconeer archetype I decided to take. She's spent time with me exploring Tal'Dorei and facing off against Thordak even when we were in Emon, Thordak's forces. And so, yeah, she's a badass 3-year-old bird, okay? Big old red-tailed hawk. That's it, though, guys. That's my first player diary ever. I hope to do more of these. We also actually ended up running Cyberpunk on Friday anyway, because one of our players for Pathfinder got sick. We did Pathfinder on Sunday, Cyberpunk on Friday. So I'm going to have a GM diary this week as well, while I'm working on some more GM guide-related stuff. If you enjoyed this, great. I'd like to say I'm very spoiled right now. I am every other week running Cyberpunk and then playing in a Pathfinder campaign. And it just doesn't really get much better than that, does it? It feels very, very privileged to have that opportunity. My buddy Mike and I, DMing for each other essentially, and making sure that neither of us faces the forever DM curse for any longer. Thank you all so much for watching. Check out some of my other videos if you're interested in what I do here on the channel. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Be awesome to one another. And I'll see you around.